Today, we're diving into one of the Bible's most, unsettling stories. It comes from the book of Judges, and it's all about a desperate and brutal quest to find wives for the last surviving men of the tribe of Benjamin.
So let me just start by asking you a question. Imagine you've made a sacred, absolutely unbreakable oath. But what happens when that very oath
forces you into an impossible corner, a choice between keeping your word and the actual survival of an entire people? You're trapped between your honor and your own kin. What do you do?
Well, for the ancient Israelites, this wasn't just a thought experiment. It was very real. And as we're about to see, their solution wasn't simple or clean. Oh no. It led them down a path of shocking violence and some pretty clever, if not terrifying, legal loopholes.
Okay, so let's really unpack the problem they were facing. It all starts with what I'm calling an oath of extinction.
The scene is just filled with grief. You have the people weeping before God. And why? Because the tribe of Benjamin is literally on the verge of being wiped out. And you can feel the weight of this. The other tribes are crying out, "Today one tribe is cut off from Israel."
And right here, this is their impossible trap, laid bare. On one hand, the goal is simple. It's fundamental. You must preserve all 12 tribes. You cannot let one just disappear. But then you have the oath they swore. Cursed be anyone who gives a wife to a Benjamite. These two things, they're in total opposition.
So this leads to the question, the one the elders themselves are asking. How can we possibly provide wives for the men who are left since we swore this oath not to give them our daughters? How do you solve a paradox like that? Well, their first answer is pretty grim.
All right, let's get into their first attempt to fix this. They find what we'll call the Jabesh Gilead loophole. And this plan, man, it just perfectly shows their approach. It's incredibly violent, and it's all about the letter of the law.
You see, the elders remembered they'd made another oath. They had all vowed that anyone from any tribe who failed to show up for a big assembly at a place called Mizpah would be put to death. And in a really chilling moment of moral math, they saw this second vow not as another problem, but as an opportunity, a loophole. So they do a head count, and wouldn't you know it, they find a group that broke that second oath. It turns out no one, not a single person from the town of Jabesh Gilead had shown up. Suddenly, they had a target, and they had their justification. The instructions that came next were just chillingly precise. This wasn't just about punishing the men. No, the orders were to execute every single man and every woman who was not a virgin. The whole point was to seize the unmarried young women left behind. And get this wasn't some small raid. We're talking about a full-scale military operation. They sent 12,000 of their best soldiers to get this done.
So, from the entire city of Jabesh Gilead, they returned with their prize, 400 young women. A truly brutal solution, but hey, problem solved, right? Or was it?
This brings us to the next problem, a gap in the tribes. Because even after all that bloodshed at Jabesh Gilead, the elders quickly realized their math was off.
So those 400 women were given to the Benjamites, but it just wasn't enough. There were still men left without wives. The tribe was still on the brink.
And so the grieving starts all over again. The text says they were grieving because the Lord had made a gap in the tribes of Israel. That first violent plan, it had failed, and they were right back where they started, with a hole in their nation.
So facing failure, did they give up? Nope. They came up with a second plan, one that was even more audacious, the Shiloh abduction. So they knew that every year there was this big religious festival at a place called Shiloh. And during this festival, it was tradition for the local young women to come out and dance. This tradition, this became the core of their new strategy.
The instructions for the remaining Benjamite men sound like something out of a guerrilla warfare manual. They were told, go to Shiloh, hide in the vineyards, wait for the women to start dancing, and then, at just the right moment, rush out. Each of you grab one woman for a wife and get out of there. Run.
But hold on a second. How does this not break the original oath? The men of Israel would still be, providing wives for Benjamites. How could they possibly justify this? And here it is, the absolute masterstroke of their legalistic thinking. The elders essentially told the families of Shiloh, listen, you will not be guilty for this. Why? Because you didn't give your daughters to them. They were taken from you. It's a technicality, an unbelievable one. that let them keep their oath technically intact while orchestrating a mass abduction.
So, what was the result of all this bloodshed and scheming? Well, that brings us to our final section, as they saw fit.
You know, on the surface, it looks like the plan worked. The Benjamites did exactly what they were told. They seized their wives, went home, rebuilt their towns, and the tribe of Benjamin was saved. The gap was filled.
But the story doesn't just end there, with a happily ever after. It ends with this final, haunting sentence. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. And that line, it changes everything. It reveals the true point. This wasn't a story about clever problem solving. It was a commentary on total moral chaos. A society without a rudder, where sacred oaths could justify massacres and kidnapping could be framed as a solution. It leaves us with a really profound question. What happens when survival is the only law?